Hello everyone, my name is Fiona, and I want to ask you guys, have you guys seen The Shining?
Yes.
Yes.
Who has seen Eyes Wide Shut? Shutter Island? 2001 A Space Odyssey? Okay, cool. So if you've seen any of those films, you probably have heard of Ligeti's music. And what's kind of a cool thing, actually it wasn't really a cool thing, Ligeti was probably not really well known back then, and Stanley Kubrick actually used the piece I'm going to be talking about, Lontano, in his film 2001 A Space Odyssey without his permission. And actually Ligeti found out during the premiere in Vienna when he was, watching this film, and he's like, "Oh my God, that's my piece." And of course, he got money. He got $3,000, but and royalty checks. But later on down the road, in The Shining and in other films, he was definitely paid a lot more. But Kubrick, thanks to Kubrick, Ligeti was more famous because of illegally using his music in his film. So, in this presentation, the title of my presentation is called Micropolyphony as a Compositional Structure in Ligeti's Lontano, which is a piece he wrote in 1967. So I am going to discuss why I chose to analyze this piece, a little about Ligeti's background, the overall character and kind of background of Lontano, and then I'm going to discuss what micropolyphony is and how Ligeti used this technique to kind of write this piece. Then we're going to look at the score and listen to the recording. We're not going to do the same together because it's very difficult to follow along. And then I'm going to end with a conclusion why I think Ligeti is such an innovative and important composer. So why did I choose Lontano to analyze? Well, I first saw The Shining when I was about 7 years old, thanks to my dad, and it freaked me out. I heard Lontano, it was in the film, and it was just so eerie and dissonant and creepy and frightening and beautiful at the same time and sad. And I was like, wow, what is this piece? It was just so massively detailed, and it just felt like this kind of wall of sound, and I didn't know how. I was like, how is that constructed? Is that all notated? Is it a graphical score? I was kind of thinking about this, and then flash till now, I'm a big Kubrick fan, and I just am a big fan of Ligeti, and so I wanted to really analyze this piece to see really what was going on in this piece. As a composer, I want to know what makes the pieces work, how does he compose the piece, and it actually gave me an appreciation because I was able to see how this process that he used helped compose this piece. And it's actually a very detailed, procedural thing that's kind of a formula that's going on that's actually in a way could make the piece seem like, oh, he's using that, and it could kind of simplify the piece, but actually it's very detailed and it is like, whoa, very, very intense and intricate. So let's talk about Ligeti's background. So he's a Hungarian-Austrian composer. He lived from 1923 to 2006. There's kind of two directions in music that were kind of going on during the time when he was developing his voice as a composer. There were those that were kind of committed to kind of pushing, a new understanding of tonality, and then there were the serialists, those kind of, wanting to expand the 12-tone composition. And, instead of trying to overthrow the whole music establishment like Stockhausen or Boulez, Ligeti actually decided to focus on detail and really this kind of musical continuity and kind of gradually shifting textures in his music. And this happened kind of later in his life, in his 30s, because in the beginning, when he was still in Hungary, a lot of people compared his works to Bartók. And it wasn't until, after the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, that's when he kind of traveled to West Europe. And from there, he wanted to really explore more with kind of texture and timbre rather than melody and harmony. And he also, another important piece was that he was introduced to Stockhausen's electronic music studio. And so it kind of inspired him, those electronic sounds, Not so much that he was making electronic music, but that he more wanted to create this kind of electronic sounding texture in the acoustic music that he was composing. So that was kind of an important event that happened. So a little about Lontano. Lontano, the word means far away. It means distant. And it has to do, it's actually a single movement orchestral piece. And it's neither tonal or atonal. It's actually, the truth is that there's no actual predictive progression. You know, it's like the piece kind of unfolds on its own accord, and it doesn't reach certain goals until the piece has gotten to a certain, you know, furthered along a certain amount of time that it then, you know, starts to go somewhere. But according to Ligeti, he said the piece could, you know, it could go on forever if it wanted to. So goals, you know, only emerge once the music has begun to reach them. And also form was not a central component in the piece. So, you know, physical distance, we can look at the physical distance and also this kind of temporal distance, which is like these fragmented polyphonic lines that kind of create a source of time-based misperception. And physical distance, you know, he would use things like complex sounds, like, you know, a minor ninth sounds more complex than like a perfect octave or a perfect fifth. And he would use dynamics, like softer dynamics are going to tend to appear further away than louder dynamics. And also registers, high and very low registers are going to, you know, seem further away than sounds are kind of in the middle of the register. And also orchestration, how he used orchestration, you know, strings, the timbre of strings are going to sound further away than like a brass instrument that has more presence. So you can see like a purely kind of harmonic analysis is not going to work so well with this piece, just because there's all these different elements, these kind of competing and combining elements that kind of work together. So I'm going to talk about, this is a quote that Ligeti used to describe Lontano. So he said, "It's a window to dream worlds of childhood long ago forgotten, seen through curious soft crystal formations." He also describes this dream world as a huge fibrous and filmy web filling his room, and in it are embedded bugs, beetles, moths, and a heavy moisture-soiled pillow. Some of these creatures temporarily break free, causing undulating movements throughout the web, behind which a few candles blink in a kind of iridescence. Each change in the web is irreversible. There is something inexpressibly sad about this process. The hopelessness of elapsing time and a past for which no amends could be made. So you can kind of see Ligeti, he was a very intuitive composer. He would actually start by, you know, drawing shapes and starting with, you know, drawing patterns on paper, and then he would decide all those really minute details. And what's really interesting about this piece is that it's completely notated. It is not a graphic score. It's not like Penderecki's score. He notated every single note and every single dynamic, every single technique here. So he really meticulously worked out every single detail in this piece. And there are three main sections in this piece, and they can be traced using the canons. So the bare kind of bones of this piece are these three canons. So this is kind of like the canon A that starts off with this first section, and then you have the canon 2, and then the canon 3, and this one kind of divides kind of in the center. So basically, a lot of these intervals are, you know, major and minor seconds. He really liked the sound of major and minor seconds because that tended to blur the harmonies. You could kind of go in different directions with major and minor seconds. There's wider intervals. There's like a minor 6 in the second canon, but mostly he sticks to pretty close intervals. And he follows these canons, you know, so one note by one note at a time, and they kind of, let me show you the score. So if we take a look at the score, this is kind of the canon number 1, and it's entering right here with the pink. Okay, so this is the first canon, and the second canon kind of enters, and it's all kind of a staggered entrance. Let's see. So let's go back to the canons. So it kind of creates this kind of continuous stream of sound. And, he does add filler notes in, so it's not purely these canons, but there is extra notes that are added for tension. So let me talk about what micropolyphony is. It's something that he actually came up with. This is a quote. "Technically speaking, I have always approached musical texture through part writing. Both atmospheres and Lontano have dense canonic structure, but you cannot hear the polyphony, the canon. You hear a kind of impenetrable texture, something like a very densely woven cobweb. I call it micropolyphony." Such a beautiful word. So what is micropolyphony? We think of micropolyphony as a compositional technique that involves the overlapping of many musical lines, traveling at different tempos and different rhythms, and they create a tone cluster. So these many different lines are kind of given different, they come in at very, very quiet, so you almost can't even tell. And they exit, sometimes they last longer than others. But the thing is, you can't really hear the individual voices. It all just kind of comes enmeshed in this kind of canonic sound mass. But it's always moving. That's what's so amazing. They're always shifting, so there's different kind of, harmonies and intervals that happen, and they're always changing. So, so every, what's fascinating is that every note was notated in this. So let's listen, and we're going to look at the score first a little further. So here's the first page. So, it enters, it's a very, very gradual entrance. And that's the thing with Lontano, is he likes to enter, it's a very kind of slow fade in and a very long fade out at the very end. So it's almost like it's kind of coming to you from far away and then leaving you. So if we look at these canons, this is the first note in canon A, canon 1. This is the second note. This is the third note and the fourth. And just staggered. Here they get a little bit more kind of, kind of intertwined. Here the texture becomes more complex. You can kind of see more of this kind of major second intervallic ratio going on. And I'm going to point out to the different sections because I have that marked out. So canon B comes in here, kind of measures 57, and here they're all kind of starting together. This is extra filler material as well. And then the third canon starts here. And this one also, the first note kind of starts together. And there's the canon 3A. So we're going to listen to this, and I'm not going to try to follow along on this score because it's much too complicated, and the cans enter almost imperceptibly, so it's very hard to tell. But see if you can just kind of hear the micropolyphony in the piece. slow fade out. So could you kind of hear the different canons? The different canons that were kind of traversing at different tempos. So this was, what we just heard was Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra conducted by Jonathan Knott. So in conclusion, Ligeti was, for me, one of the most interesting, detail-oriented, and expressive composers of the 20th century. And Lontano was not only established in the concert repertoire, it was also appeared in the film soundtrack, and, you know, in films of some of the greatest directors. So, you know, his piece was used to really kind of capture this kind of gripping tension and suspense. And I think that, you know, Micropolyphony was kind of a magical technique that he used to kind of create this sort of atmosphere and feeling, and express basically what couldn't be done by the actors and on the screen. So if you haven't seen any of these films, you know, 2001 or The Shining, Eyes Wide Shut, or Shutter Island, I highly recommend them so you can really experience the genius that is Ligeti. So thank you so much.
I was really struck this time. We did run-throughs last week, basically, and sort of tweak things and different things. But just with, you know, two completely different traditions with yours, Daniel, and yours, Fiona, with this sense of visuality, sort of as an impetus for certain kinds of music making, and particularly the sense of depth that you get, or whether it's, you know, because it's getting at this idea of distance, or, and in your case, you know, the way that the score represents sort of a depth and a surface and that kind of thing. So you know, completely different, but it sort of, it struck me today that there's a kind of connection to visuality with, obviously with yours deliberately, but with Ligeti, it came through very clearly. Yeah, his description, and that he drew things to sort of begin the process of imagining what.
Yeah, he was very intuitive, intuitive composer, and you know, worked with patterns, shapes, like making sketches and stuff like that to kind of really just get down the bigger idea of what he wanted, what instruments he wanted to use together, when he wanted them to come in, enter and exit, and then he really kind of, it's like he used the right brain for that planning, and then the left brain to really meticulously, you know, write out every single note.
Right, which is, you know, part of the fascination of it as the final experience of it, versus seeing, you know, the meticulous score and how that as collectively comes about in performance, what it creates, you know, through the performance. It's really interesting. That wasn't a question, of course. It was just like a sort of a, it was enhanced this week for me anyway. Maybe hearing it a second time too.
Yeah.
You're using the Kubrick films as an inciting incident. I'm wondering how Kubrick uses Ligeti. Spaghetti. What is his name?
Ligeti.
Ligeti?
Yeah.
I've heard his name pronounced like 3 different ways.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, is it Ligeti?
Ligeti?
But I don't know.
Ligeti.
Either
way, Ligeti, yeah.
Have you heard him say it?
I haven't. But yeah, Kubrick, I feel like, you know, for 2001, Space Odyssey, he had a bunch of, you know, the temp tracks, basically. He had those for the film. And he actually had a composer that was supposed to compose the music. And when Kubrick heard the music by the new composer, he's like, no, it's not good enough. So he ended up going with all the temp track music. So I think sometimes it could be that the director gets so attached to the temp music that it's just like, you know, when they're hearing a composer that's trying to mimic what's already been done and, you know, created, it sort of sounds like a not as good version of it. But, you know, for like in The Shining, you know, Lontano was just used to kind of just create this kind of gripping tension, this really like sense of fear. this, I mean, he uses it a few times in The Shining, and there's one time where the main character Jack is like throwing darts at the board, and you know, it's just he's just you know, we don't know when he's going to kind of turn on his wife and kid, and so it's kind of like this just suspense and this unknowing, anxious apprehension. And you can't really get that just from what's going on the screen. You kind of can, but there was actually another video on YouTube that replaced the music in The Shining and added like upbeat, happy music, and the story completely changed. So, in a way, I feel like directors will use music to kind of make their scenes really, you know, drive their scenes really deep in the audience or in the person experiencing them, because it makes it like 100 times more powerful, more intense.
Yeah, that seems true of almost all film music.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, I guess I'm trying to ask a more specific question than I'm actually asking. What parts of this piece is Kubrick using, and to what end?
Oh, you know, I don't know exactly which point in Lontano that he uses, but it's definitely where, you know, it's definitely part where it like really swells, and it's like, you know, it starts really quiet. And a lot of, you know, there's a lot of this ebb and flow in Lontano where it like builds and then kind of releases and builds again and then releases. So there's he uses that kind of swelling where it's just kind of increasing exponentially in tension, and then, you know, something happens. Yeah.
So for the Lontano, you said that Ligeti didn't know, right, that he was using his music.
Right,
and then
right.
after he kind of got paid more and everything. So after, did he compose the music for the movie specifically, or it was orchestral and then?
Right. So yeah, a friend actually told Ligeti, oh, you should check out this film that's playing in America, Stanley Kubrick, and he's like, oh, I'll check it out. He went to the Vienna opening of it, and that's where he heard his music. And Ligeti only wrote music for the concert repertoire, and then it was used for film.
Okay.
Like in Eyes Wide Shut, Musica Ricercata was used, which is it's like a piano. It's where he limited himself to like using 2 notes in this piano piece, so that gets played a lot. But yeah, no, he wrote the music outside of the film, and Kubrick or Scorsese took the music and applied it to their film. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
So there's research coming out about the relationship between how we perceive sound within a culture and how we map sound, how that maps onto creative production. I'm thinking of Steve Feld, phonesthetic iconicity, like how you're talking about soft and loud as being a sagittal dimension, like closer or farther away, and register high pitch being up and lower pitch being down. I'm wondering if there's more going on here with that. Like, is he actually using this? Is he using it in more than just like blanket Western ways? Is he using it in like Austro-Hungarian ways? Is that a thing?
Yeah, so he did have, you know, a lot of these kind of broken polyphonic lines that he's using, kind of create this like kind of temporal kind of so you're kind of losing, it's kind of a misperception. So he's kind of doing that with the different polyphonic lines. And also, you know, with Stockhausen's, you know, introduction to the electronic music, you know, and hearing electronic music, he's like, I want to be able to kind of really bend timbre, you know, experiment with this texture timbre thing to really create this new kind of sound. He said, there was a quote that Ligeti said, there's like, the avant-garde's on one wall, and then there's the past on another wall, and he's like, I want to get out of this. He wanted to definitely, you know, go his own direction. I mean, he really, you know, there's a lot more in the scores than I talked about, you know, a lot of articulations that I could have analyzed even further, you know, the different types of bowings and playing, and he also talked about the tuning of the instruments as well, which I didn't really cover in detail, pure tuning and kind of in relationship to the other notes. So that could be a whole other presentation just with the tuning that he used as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he expanded it past just yeah.
We can move on. Thank you very much.